Today I will speak about culture-specific forms of ideologies in verbal interactions, and more precisely the Trobriand Islanders' ideology of competition and cooperation in the make, an anthropological linguistic case study in times of globalization. You will hear also for the first time Kilivila, real Kilivila. I have a kind of 7 minutes long film where a young, relatively young, from my perspective a young man gives a speech to the Trobriand Islanders, and in order to follow that you have to have this handout here with a speech. It's a 10-page handout. If you don't have it, please get it outside, otherwise you're fine. Okay, has everybody seen these things before, or should I go through it again where we are geographically with respect to the Trobriand Islanders? You want me to do it? Yeah, is there anybody new who was not in the last two talks that I presented? No, okay, then I go over that. Here is the map here where we are. You see Port Moresby, that's the capital of Papua New Guinea, and you see, okay, that's better. And you see the Trobriand Islands. Here on the map you see that the whole archipelago consists of a number of islands. I'm not on the biggest one, that was the island where Malinovsky was. I'm just in the west of this island, on Kailiuna Island, and there the northernmost village, which is called Tauima, is my place of residence when I'm on the Trobriand Islands. I said about the Trobriand Islanders that they belong to the northern Massing, but they are yams gardeners, and this is very important for today, the yams gardening, doing slash and burn cultivation. They are carvers, canoe builders, and navigators. They are matrilineal and very local, and the language is called Kilivila. And this is my village, Tauri. Now, before I start my talk, I just want to point out that when you have these harvest festivals, the harvest festivals start with the fact that the Trobriand Islanders, first of all, get out all the yams in their yams gardens, and they pile them up in big piles, like you see them here, first in the gardens. Then all the other people go through the gardens of other villages and inspect how good the garden results were this year for this village. And then the Trobriand Islanders bring the yams into the village and pile them up here. And this is the yams that will go into this big yams house. It's called a liku. And this liku, as you see, is open. It displays all the yams that were gardened, and of course what do the Trobriand Islanders do when they fill them in? And that is the first part of the festival, that is called the Dadoriga, the filling in feast. They just put the most beautiful ones at the outside that the people see the greatest, biggest and beautifulest yam tubers at first sight. That gives you an impression that this is a kind of showing off. The Trobrianders are extremely proud of their yam tubers, and the more they have, the more they show. And the more a person has with respect to yams, that is especially the more a man as a gardener has harvested, the better and the higher is his status. This is just to give you a brief introduction of what will follow. This is the topic of competition and cooperation on the Trobriand Islands, and we'll hear more about that in a few minutes. Competition is one of the most typical and characteristic features of the Trobriand Islanders' culture and society. And in this talk, I present and analyze a speech in which a man in his late 30s transmits his version of the Trobriand ideology of competition and cooperation to a group of school children in Tauin. After a brief introduction that contextualizes this speech and introduces the concept of language, in this case educational ideologies, I present and analyze the speech which documents this ideology of competition and cooperation in the make. It also reveals that this ideology is already influenced by radiations of present processes of globalization, radiations which by now have reached villages as remote as Taurine. In our volume coming up on the Tropic Islands in Papua New Guinea, Childhood and Educational Ideologies in Taurima, by the way, you can download this and my last 3 books from my website. Just go there and you get a link and you can download it for free. It's in open access. My wife and I pointed out that on the Tropians, attempts of parental education are confined to a minimum. That parents only relatively sporadically request strict obedience from their children, and that the Tropians consider their function as parents first and foremost as a priming one. That means they believe and trust in the power of the good example, the proper role model. If the parents think if they lead an orderly life, then their children will do so as well. The most important institution for education and socialization is the children's group. And I already mentioned that once a child is weaned, the child has to find a place in such a children's group. And the older the child gets, the more authority and the more responsibility it will have. So it will start from a very beginner at the outside, from a young toddler who looks for support and help with his relatives who are also in that group, up to someone who becomes a group leader, be it a girl or boy. They do not make any kind of differentiations there. Girls and boys have very big rights. There is no real kind of big gender differentiations with respect to the influence someone has in a group. However, it goes without saying that the Tropians also use a number of more subtle educational means to prepare their children for their roles in their social world, trying to make sure that their children will gradually grow into the role of respected members of their society, that they come up with the culture-specific expectations of what it requires and means to be a responsible and valuable adult, and to thus completely conform with the cultural and social norms that are valid and essential for their construction of reality. These educational aims are based on a set of beliefs governing conduct. And this expression, this phrase, can be found with one of the definitions the Oxford English Dictionary provides for the entry ideology. That is what I mean with that topic, ideology, a set of beliefs governing conduct. In agreement with this definition, we understand the set of beliefs that underlie the Tropian Islanders' educational aims as culture-specific educational ideologies. This understanding is supported by Jeff Verschuren's discussion of the concept. In his monograph that you see here on ideology in language use, Jeff Verschuren points out that ideology is associated with underlying patterns of meaning, frames of interpretation, worldviews or forms of everyday thinking and explanation. One of the definitions he provides for ideology runs as follows. We can define as ideological any basic pattern of meaning or frame of interpretation bearing on or involved in an aspect or in aspects of social reality, in particular in the realm of social relations in the public sphere, felt to be commonsensical and often functioning in a normative way. Verschuren then continues, and I quote, "One of the most visible manifestations of ideology is language use or discourse, which may reflect, construct, and or maintain ideological patterns. And indeed, it is in language use where we find manifestations of the Tropian Islanders' educational ideologies. Contrary to what, for example, Margaret Mead, 1930, reports about the Manus Islanders, the Tropians, adults as well as children, are great storytellers. Margaret Mead wrote a book on growing up in Papua New Guinea, and she worked for this book on Manus Island. And it is in these different kinds of stories, tales, and specific speeches that we could document on the Tropian Islands, where we find some of the basic concepts that underlie and constitute the Tropian Islanders' educational ideologies. This understanding of ideology is fundamental to my analysis of Kidaila's speech that you will hear in a moment. However, before I present the speech, let me start with the following observation. Competition and cooperation on the tropions, my first aha experience. When I was there in 1982, we just had a year where we had a kayasa in our village in Tauema. A kayasa is a harvest competition. And in this harvest competition, there will be prizes distributed at the end of this competition when everyone knows how much everybody has harvested, and you get a prize for that if you are a good gardener. Now, I thought this is a very strange behavior, because they give, of course, something to the first person who was the best gardener, then someone to the second, to the third, but they go on. They continue. And they continue up to the very end. That means it's a public phrase-threatening act, I thought, because if you are the last one, you are more or less publicly blamed as being an absolute lazy one. I wouldn't like to be in that position. It must feel horrible to be mentioned at last as the worst gardener in the village. And the only way out, really the only way out, is that you just use the cathartic function of laughter. You come up with a joke. It can't be a stupid one, it has to be a joke, and it should really make people laugh, so you can get away with a laugh. The organizer of such a big kayasa, of course, has to be a man of influence. Just imagine when I came there, we had 240 people in the village of Tauema. And let's say we had about 60 adult men. And they all had to get a prize. And you can't do that as a private person. You have to, people who support you as an important man and work for you as well. So this organizer has to rely on cooperators who help him to accumulate the necessary prizes. Now, you do not just cooperate with someone just to make him a name. You want to get something out of it as well. So the cooperators get a reward, namely they get the future support by a man who had shown with this kayasa who he is, that he is a man of influence, that he is a man of power, and that he is someone on one can trust on, and one can rely on. Now, what about the competition? Competition is really one of the most characteristic features of the tropianless culture. It's always based on cooperation between competitors and their supporters. And it permeates all areas of the Tropian islanders' life, like, for example, the control of land, leadership questions, gardening, magic, magical formulae and use of magic and competence in magic, mortuary ceremonies, and games. The Tropian islanders have developed a marvelous, very indigenous form of cricket. Has nothing to do whatsoever with a relatively boring, at least to me sometimes, boring British game where you just have the pitcher and the catcher and everybody looks how long they run and run and run. The Tropian islanders really make a spectacular fight out of that. They have teams that may not have the same number of players, but usually it's quite clear who will win the game at the beginning, because they either have more people or they have better people, or they give all the food for all the players and therefore let them win. But it's an incredible big game that incorporates almost everybody, both be player or non-player. Now, let's with that idea, have a look at Kedaila's speech, which transmits his version of the Tropianless ideology of competition and cooperation. The speech I documented in June 2003, and Kedaila told me he would give the following speech with the title Educating Pedagoguari Pedagogunesi Buena Balu Tauema. And this can be glossed as educating children in the good customs of Tauema. The audience of Gedaila is a handful of girls sitting on palm tree leaves in the shade of Chief Mutaessa's big yam house, and the Chief Mutaessa, you will see him in that red t-shirt with a little basket and eating betel nuts. You have the transcription of the speech on the handout, and I will just run the little film up to the very end. The film ends then when I just give a kind of round view of the village, so you get a kind of idea of the situation, of how where all this happened. Okay, now please take your handouts and listen. First of all, I make some comments in German, you needn't understand them, on what I have just filmed.
2003, Teorema Gedaila macht mit den Vorschulkindern eine Schule über Bugunesi Poena Walu Teorema. Okay.
Now it starts.
Galapele bika wila mana ko aina biki buati bipila siga bilipila tongo dari tuwon. Ga. Isawali epuetu kulat bipila sisi pela wal tahu tongo ta. Tawa bibi jadi buat jadi dulu. Kita kuatala. Atu uyu yang pola isisu, tu binigi, biwini semua ki, bubuna tola. Awalnya bubune la buat, emuto na vida bika. Awalnya bubune la gala vida bika. Buku ada la pola sipai siu siawalis, ini bela wala kabita. Ya kabita wala pola isi sena mausi. Bota kami tulis makarasta kaya wala pola. Pero udah kibibani. Tuto duya si buwan. Yang kuatala wala pola sipai siu. Bukan awal. Isawali si puetu kula ini sepeda wal kabitam ni. Kalau makala dim kabitam siwawa. Iya kami sebuah gal. Kabitam sena mua wal pai. Iga kapabu ya. Peda ke gini ori le buat semua. Isawali sepeda kabitam. Isawali lo pola tanik marasi na ulo. Aku mau makala pola buat.
Hago toque, tu puedes hago toque de la isla, hago toque de la moaya, ¿sí? Bueno.
Another big dance house here. Thank you, of course. Okay, now we go through the handout and I'll tell you what's going on there in that speech. In the first 5 lines, Kedaila we find Kedaila's introduction to this speech and the first question. It's an acknowledgement that school children are busy, and the first question on inline 5 is, what do you want? The children respond in line 6 an answer, and I'm not sure whether this answer was staged before or not, but the answer is Kapitan. Now, what is Kapitan? What does Kapitan mean? Persons who are characterized as to Kapitan gain expert knowledge and proficient skills in a specific domain. Like, for example, they are master carvers, they are master magicians, they are master canoe builders, they are master orators. They are, as I said, then masters in their field. They are very intelligent, very clever, and some of them are also very artistic. Kedaila is reassuring his question in line 7, which is answered positively again by the children in line 8. Now we look at lines 9 to 21. Kedaila then points out that he and others, but not the children, are very busy to get capital. The children have not been busy enough so far in their efforts to gain knowledge. And this is followed by an elaboration on the difficult, tiresome, and painful road to capital. The children will feel the need for it like hunger, but they also feel tiredness and pain, and an emphasis on the fact that people will know who has acquired this. It's obvious if you have acquired capital or not. This acknowledgement is a benefit for those who want to follow this road. It implies status and prestige, two things that each and every Tropian, be man or woman, boy or girl, will seek to reach. People know that the ones recognized as having capital will be able to use their skills. Now, in line 15, capital is equal to with vavagi, and vavagi can be glossed as products, deeds created during a long process of learning. Then in lines 22 to 23, we see that Kedaila is asking his second question, and this question is, where will the capital appear? And the children give the answer, and again I do not know whether it was staged or not, in deeds. In lines 25 to 27, Kedaila elaborates on deeds as a proof for capital. And then in lines 28 till 31, Kedaila asks his third question, namely the question cui bono, for whom will it be good? For all the people or for the relatives only? The literal translation of this question that he asks is, who will eat it? Of course, if you don't know Kilibila, you would not understand what's going on here. Why does he come up with this kind of question, where he means that who will really get something for, who will get the good thing out of this painful learning of capital? Now, why does he answer the question who will eat it? Tokabitam are usually paid for their skills with food, mostly with yams and beetronuts. They usually redistribute this food surplus within their clan or during competitive food exchange ceremonies and gain prestige and status. In the whole of the Pacific, not only on the Tropians, but in the whole of Melanesia and Polynesia and Micronesia, you can say the main idea is it is not who you are, but how you give that counts in Oceania. Now, the children answer that question very promptly for our relatives. And Kedaila then, in lines 33 to 39, elaborates on this answer. Once the children have acquired capital, they should only support their maternal clanspersons. They should not profit themselves from their capital, and they should act in a completely altruistic way. This was very surprising for me, because everything I knew before about this culture was that it's not an altruistic culture at all. This concept is absolutely foreign to the Tropian Islander society. What counts is the clan and no one else, nothing else. Kedaila may come up with this last demand because he doesn't want the school children to become presumptuous, despite the fact that he indoctrinates them with his speech as becoming the future Elite, and despite the fact that this would be impossible anyhow. The Tokabitan is a person with prestige and status, and the Tokabitan is proud that he is or she is a person with prestige and status. Now, Kedaila repeats that Kabitan is something busy inside of people. And he points out that school children who feel tiredness, hunger and pain exclusively for their maternal kinspersons who will profit from their acquired Kabitan. And then he announces his fourth point. Kedaila addresses the children as children of Tauwema, who live and work in his village, and asks them, are you busy for Tauwema or for another village? And then again, in line 46, the children answer for Tauwema. in the lines 47 to 48, Kedaila repeats this answer and then demands from the children exclusive solidarity with their village community. That means he no longer points out that you have to give everything to your clansperson. Here he says you have to be solidarity. You have to show solidarity with the whole village community, and of course the whole village community includes people that belong to a different clan. So, what kind of demands does Kedaila have towards the children? He demands that the children should strive for knowledge at school, that they use their acquired kapitam for the benefit of maternal kinspersons, and that they offer their services exclusively for Tauwema and its inhabitants. Now, in the lines 49 to 57, Kedaila elaborates now on another demand, namely repeating it, explicitly excluding support for other people, and requesting solidarity for the village community once again. And then he announces the last point he wants to make in this speech. It's the lines 58 to 62 are for me the culmination of the speech. Here Kedaila points out that the school children will work hard as any other responsible person within the village community. Hard work is good custom, and that is really something that is absolutely believed in the Trobriand Islands. If you are a hard worker, you have a good custom and you are respected by everybody. People whose customs are good can rely on the fact that the community will reward them. They can always take their share in social and economic welfare of the village. And people whose customs are bad cannot. This reminded me very, very much on a German sociologist and philosopher, Max Weber. And Max Weber came up with a fascinating book on Protestantic ethics. And in this book he points out that Protestantic ethics asks you to be a good worker, because only as a good worker you can get into heaven. And this is, it was the first thought I had when I heard that speech. Has he read Max Weber? Of course not. But note that the archaic Avelai in line 60, Avelai for Avela, who marks here the seriousness and the traditional validity of this norm and maxim. In the lines 63 to 77, Kedaila then first summarizes his speech as follows. He points out first, all school children are busy in searching for capital. That's 63 to 64. Then line 65, but also in line 63, you can read that as, it is hard to acquire knowledge and have it inside. Actually, that is another interesting thing. Why do you have something inside yourself? And it's olopola, what he says inside, but olopola also means inside the belly. And the Trobriand Islanders believe that they store any knowledge in the belly. For example, when you ask a magician who knows a lot of really very complex magical formulae, a number of them, how do you memorize that? And he said, well, it's all here. And he claps on his tummy. That is a very different idea from where we would say it's all here. So we should probably respect our stomach a bit more, according to Trobriand Islanders' belief systems. Then he says, it is difficult and even painful to find the roads to acquire knowledge and to construct these roads inside one's body. But once one has achieved this, one will feel very well again. And striving for kapitam will then be one's daily routine. Kedaila then compares the Trobrianders with white people and states in line 71 to 73, kapitam is the thing of the white person. The domain of the Trobrianders is not knowledge, it is their gardens and gardening. Now, he contradicts with this the main points of his speech, and this is quite provocative to the audience, because they have to do their very, very best so that they can compete with the dividend. This is a plausible reading because immediately after this, Kedaila emphasizes again that the children will do their very best to achieve Kapitan and thus will become smart and intelligent people. That's in line 75 and 76. Kedaila then assesses his speech, pointing out that he has paved the way that leads towards knowledge, unknotting its various paths. And he finishes his talk in lines 76 to 77 with a joking reference to my work, insinuating that this speech will soon be transcribed and stored in my notebook, lines 76 and 77, and with a ritual speech closing formula, it's already finished, book Wamesima. Now, what about the ideology of competition and cooperation transmitted in this speech? Kedaila's concept of Kapitan doesn't refer to the traditional concept. Children do not learn how to become a master carver, a magician, a canoe builder, a navigator, a healer at school. Kedaila motivates his audience to acquire the Kapitan, which is codified in Papua New Guinea curricula, most of which are based on Australian theories of education and the respective Australian teaching aids, like books and other things, other materials. However, to acquire this Kapitan is as difficult and burdensome as becoming a Tokapitan in the traditional domains of tropical culture. Tokapitan are forced to prove their faculties and deeds and actions, which are easy to observe. As I said the other day, if you are a rain magician, and if people approach you and say, we want to have rain in 3 days, and what do you ask us to pay you for this? And he said, well, I would like to have 3 basketfuls of yams and a big bunch of betel nuts, and then I will work. And then he starts working. Usually, weather magicians are usually men, and he starts working, and he also starts to not eat a number of things that are taboo for him while he is preparing his work. And then in 3 days, people expect rain. And if it's raining, it's fine. If it's not raining, they say, what have you done? We want our food back. And if he does that 2 or 3 or 4 times, he is derided, and no one will ask him to control the weather anymore. So these skills are really publicly checked and examined. And you have to have the confidence that you can make it rain. And the weather magicians I knew, they all were very confident, and they made that rain. It's a very, very strange experience. So if these weather magicians would fail, that would mean a big, big loss of reputation. Now the school children, as the future Tokapitan, actually face the same challenges. They have to prove their competence to ensure their public reputation, and they have to compete with each other, like the traditional Tokapitan. One of the few accepted excuses of a magician why his work didn't work properly, why it didn't rain, for example, if the weather magician was asked to make rain, is, well, but my neighbor has also made weather magic, and he had made weather magic to have sunshine, because they had a festival, and his weather magic was stronger. But this is the court of last resort. You can, again, say these things once or twice in a year. But that's, otherwise, you have lost your name as a weather magician. Now, the demand to exclusively support one's matrilineal clanspersons highlights again the strong undercurrents of rivalry and competition between the 4 main clans that go back to time immemorial. But the demand to offer services again exclusively to the village community severely weakens this first demand. That was one of the things that I just mentioned when I went through the speech. The Tropian society is, as I said, quite often now matrilineal, but the residence is matrilocal. So most of the children's matrilineal clanspersons live in their mother's villages. So the demand to extend services to the village community is contradictory to the demands to only support clanspersons, and it puts the children in a kind of social dilemma. This is an indication of severe contradictions in a society that is torn between traditional and modern values. and it's also, I think, the first time that the Tropen Islanders are starting to change from a matrilineal society into a patrilineal society. That has also some more implications. It's also supported, that kind of change, by the fact, for example, that school fees for the children that go to high school on the main island, for example, have to be paid by the fathers of the children throughout Papua New Guinea, and they do not care whether then the fathers invest in someone who is foreign to them, actually, is not related to them. And then, of course, the fathers respect some reward. The father's line respects some reward from the child. So the child is under pressure to work for two clans, for one of his own clan or her own clan, that is the mother's clan, but also the father's clan, because the father invested money in their education. And the absolutely tricky and stupid thing by people who are school officials on the Tropen Islands is that they give the children that come to them their first name, but also as a second name, as a family name, the name of their father. And this is absolutely chaotic, because names are clan property. If you ask a person on the Tropians, Amyaga, what's your name? Then you will get the first name, and if you are versed in that culture, you know, this is a Malasi, or no, this is a Lukuba, no, this is a Lukwasisiga. But if you have, for example, your Amyaga, and you get an answer, Pulya Nusai, then you will know that Pulya actually is the name of a Malasi, and Nusai is the name of a Lukwasisiga. So you do not know anything about the identity of the person who introduces himself or herself to the guy who asks the question. This creates a lot of chaos on the Tropians at the moment. Now, however, to go back to the speech, whoever is willing to take over responsibilities can expect her or his share in the social-economic welfare of the village. And this is an assurance of the validity of the Tropian Islanders' social contract for everybody who accepts the Tropian ethics of hard work. Resorting to these traditional ethics provides security for the school children and for other adolescents and younger people in their confrontation with new Western and also Eastern ideas, values and standards in their changing culture. For example, a lot of things that are traded and that you can buy in stores on the Tropian Islands come from China. There is a competition in both the acquisition and the use of capital, on the individual level, on the matrilineal clan level, on the village community level, and on the broader national and even international level. However, the Tropian ethics, based on the dialectic interplay between competition and cooperation, offer social and economic security to everybody who is willing to engage in this kind of competition and cooperation, and thus takes over his or her social responsibilities. And this is the gist of the Tropian ideology that Kedalila transmits in his speech. Now, what about this radiation of globalization processes on the Tropian Islands? Traditional forms of capital have lost their importance. Master carvers don't have any influence anymore, because big so-called curio dealers that have their stores in the big cities like Port Moresby or even Alotau or in Madang and in Goroka and Mount Hagen, they just look for quantity. They do not look for quality. If they ask for 10 pigs that are carved, they do not look whether these pigs are beautifully carved and very well done. They just want to have 10 pigs. And if someone else needs to make a beautiful wooden pig, if he or she needs the same time for that, then he of course loses motivation to work in a very careful way and to work as a master carver. So these skills are doomed to die because of the market, the capitalist market. We have also fiberglass thingies that replace the big Masawa canoes, and that means that no one is willing and able to come up with all the various efforts and the joint social knowledge to build these beautiful outrigger canoes that really can sail the sea for 300 and 400 sea miles. This is so too expensive for a clan member to activate his own clan to build these big beautiful canoes, and now the knowledge of building these canoes also gets lost. And we find that kind of culture change because of the increasing contact with and the influence of modern capitalist economy. The capitam of pupils who finished high school, left the islands, got well-paid jobs on the mainland, and sent money to their relatives is more valued than traditional forms of capitam these days. And Kedaida propagates this new custom, but striving for his capitam is supported by the old Tropian custom, the fundamental principle of competition and competitiveness in the Tropian society. People like Kedaila have realized that their children will have to compete with other Papua New Guineans, with Australians and other foreigners living in Papua New Guinea for jobs to secure their standard of living. The population explosion on the Tropians has resulted in shortening periods during which the bush could overgrow former gardenland gained by slash and burn cultivation. That means soon the Tropian soils will be over-cultivated, and then people have to leave the Tropian islands to live somewhere else. Now, a good school education will help these Tropians to adapt to the impending changes in their living conditions. The community of Tropian islanders in Port Moresby has shown that Tropians stick to their custom of cooperation, especially in their competition with other Papua New Guineans. We have almost mafia-like structures in groups of Tropian islanders that live in cities like Moresby, but also already in Madang and in Mount Hagen. This community in Moresby and in other cities confirms that Tropian ethics also work elsewhere. And these ethics, based on the interplay between competition and cooperation, offer social and economic security to everybody who is willing to engage in this kind of cooperation and competition and who takes over social responsibilities. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah? Can you have a mic?
There is a tension, right? And because sheer competition will lead to the division of the community, but cooperation is something which holds community together. So we see this tension in traditional custom teaching, but also in contemporary school teaching.
Yeah.
Right. So my question is, because in the language expressive forms, we use the English term, translated as English term as like the inner thought, right? Which is kind of maybe buffer to bridge this tension. But I don't know if this guesswork is correct, because I'm really curious about this tension.
Yeah.
How do you think the language mediates this tension?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question, by the way. I mentioned in the very first slides that you can only really manage to compete on a large scale if you have people who support you. So one of the things, if you really want to compete with others on a high level, you have to rely on people who cooperate with you. And the thing, these people who are willing to cooperate with a big man, they gain support by the big man. And if they are in need of help, for example, when they have a problem with land rights, they can go back to this big man and say, can you help me? And this man then will give his influence and his status and will support his people, the people who cooperated with him. So competition on the Tropians is almost impossible without cooperation. Even with the old Tokabitam, for example, first had to cooperate with their teachers from whom they learned their skills as magicians. When you wanted to become a magician, you first had to become an apprentice. And you had to work with For example, you have to live and work with a master carver, and the master carver, usually they are men. If the master carver realized that the apprentice was almost ready to become a master carver of himself, then he gives the best thing he has, namely his soapy. And soapy is actually water, but in this case it's spittle that the master carver puts into a pestle and then hammers it with betel nuts, and then he gives that to the apprentice. The apprentice takes that, and then he knows how to make an artistic form out of his feeling. If Trojan Islanders carve, they do not make any kind of cartoons or whatever what they would like to carve. It flows out of them, and that's why they have this kind of soapy. And in order to get soapy, you have to be an apprentice for at least 3 years. Some get it only after 4 or 5 years. But then you can also trust they have learned it and they know it, and they can extremely beautifully and artistically carve, and you see it's all a flow. All the measurements really come up in a flow. It's marvelous, beautiful. Okay, so this also, if you to become a tocapitan and someone who could compete with others, you had to have cooperation with someone else. You don't get that kind of qualification all by yourself. You have to rely on other people, which is also very nice, because this shows that the competitors also know that they are on the shoulders of other people, and this also hinders them to become too conceited. Okay.
You're welcome to ask questions about this lecture or with the whole lecture series.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you think that in terms of cooperation and competition, the notion of cooperation and competition, the culture? Well, in terms of cooperation and competition, this concept, would you say that this culture is more collective oriented, or more yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, indeed it is. The interesting thing is, even if you are such an important person who can compete in such a way, the main thing is, as you may infer from the fact that only these big competitors can organize a kayasa, to not only accumulate additional wealth, but then to redistribute. If you stick out your head for a certain moment, you can stick out your head over the masses just for a few days, and then you have to redistribute. Otherwise, people would expel you from the village. And if you are not redistributing, you really have to leave the island. But what you gain in this redistribution, that is something that you can have for yourself. That is a name, status, and fame. But that is something not material. It's really an immaterial gain that you get. It's fame. And the more you have a Butubu, my name, my name that goes over all the islands and is known everywhere, that is the main thing people then strive for. But they are not allowed to accumulate wealth. And that makes it very difficult, for example, for very, very clever and very motivated Tropian islanders who, for example, want to start a shop in the Tropians, to really do that, because their relatives will sooner or later come and say, well, I need some betel nuts or I need some sugar, thank you very much, without paying, of course, because this is a relative. And this is the end of the store, of course. So you can't do these kind of entrepreneurship things, you can't do them on the Tropians, because the society is so collectively oriented. Okay. Yeah, Hector.
With regards to that, my question is if there exist any forms of social marginalization in the traditional societies, either at an individual level or at the level of clans. So clans that would be on the lower level of the society, and how they can rely on these mechanisms of cooperation and competition to change their position.
Well, you really have to be a very industrious person. You have to try your very best. You can gain a lot of support, or you can only become a man of influence, for example, if you are a good gardener. That means you really have to garden each and every day, and you have to see that you also acquire good garden magic. You also have to see that you make sure that you get garden land, which is very good. You have to slash and burn it, and see that in all these coral areas you find places where you have a good soil, where the yams grows. You have to know how to place the yams and it gets big. For example, a trick for growing bigger yams is to put the yams not directly vertically into the soil, but slightly bent, and then it gets bigger. Then you have to make sure, for example, that your wife also gets influence, and you only become a man of influence if you are married. If you remain single, you do not basically count. People will say he had his time or she had his time. They tolerate you, they have no problem at all, even to support you when you are in need, but then you are not really a fully functioning member of the society. So as a couple, as a married couple, then, the man has to make sure that his wife is able to compete with these fiber skirt exchanges. So the more banana plants he plants for her, the more his wife will get influence and status, because she has so many things and can distribute it and give it away. And the more you give away, the more you get, of course. It's always a reciprocal thing. You give away and you get things. So that is why you find all over Oceania that maxim it counts what you give, doesn't count what you have. And then when you have come up to such a level, you can ask, first of all, other clans people, would you support me if I want to become a kind of gardener who then gets the right to have my own liku, the big yams houses. You may remember when I made that 360 degrees turn with the camera, there were little huts that just had a platform and then a roof. These are the little yam store houses. You just store the yams under the roof. But if you want to impress people, you want to have a liku, one of these big things, where you see the yams, which I showed at the very first picture. And you only can get a liku if you have at least 5 people that will work for you. And this is then granted by the chiefs. So you really then depend on your clan. If you want, or if you wanted in former times, if you wanted to make a big Masawa canoe, that meant an incredible investment of the whole clan. No man could do that on his own, because during the building of such a canoe, you had to have a number of specific experts, for example, even experts that make sure before you fell a tree that you would use for the base of the canoe, who knows magic to get little dwarfs out of the tree. They are called tokwai, and then they should leave the tree and they get something to eat in the bush. And when you come back, you can take that tree back home. And if you haven't asked the tokwai to please leave the tree, then the tree will split after you are almost finished hollowing it out. So these are the belief systems. And you then have to at least dine and wine the whole village community for 3 times. And that means that at least in the last festival you have to slaughter at least 2 pigs. And you can't do that on your own. So the clan society steps in, but then the clan of course expects you to give them these things back, and finally they will get their investment back, because then when you have a canoe, you can kind of rent it. And when you rent your canoe, you get things back for that. And then you take these things and redistribute them in your clan. And the more you can do that, the more you can accumulate, and the better you are in doing these kind of things, the better is your name.
So one question would be, the techniques for gardening, they are well known of everybody, or there are secrets that...
There are some secrets, the garden magic. If you have better garden magic, you are a better gardener.
And then the other second question would be, you mentioned the other day that the children, they socialize, and they live by themselves, but it is within the clan, or...
No, that is in over clan boundaries. That supports the solidarity of the people, because they grew up together. And these kind of secret children societies, to a certain extent, will remain existent. And these are also people, for example, who help each other. That's also a pool where you get supporters. But first of all, it's the clan. Okay?
Gunter, I have a question.
Yeah.
How much do you think a language can reflect culture and cognition?
Well, it reflects it in an extreme way, basically. Because all the underlying concepts in the foundations of a culture and in the way of how you try to express your perception of the world is somehow codified in language. And for example, even if you have these special techniques like being a master carver or so, these things all have cultural value and have cultural meaning, and the carvers can explain to you why they come up with certain patterns. And this is all cultural knowledge, and it's all a way of seeing the world. It may not be easy for us to see that, but they see it. And once they tell you about it, you see it too. But you need that kind of enlightening comments and the enlightening ideas that you are not familiar with to see, that's it, of course. And then to see, of course, this is the way they perceive it, this is the way they think about it, and this is how they express it. And it's then, of course, it's expressed semiotically in the way of how the carving looks like, but it's expressed and explained to you by words. It's explained verbally. And all the things I tell you about this kind of society or so was something I learned in discussions with my consultants. And I was extremely, or I still am extremely happy that they trusted so much in me. Because, well, there's an old saying by Labov, you can ask people a question and you just get a yes or a no. And everything else you get is a gift. And you have to estimate it as a gift that is given to you by a speech community that wants to be friendly with you because in some way or another they respect you.
So is there any non-linguistic way to represent or to express like the educational ideology of the islanders?
That is what I said before. There the Drupen Islanders believe on the priming effect of the example of mother and father. It's the family example, but of course these examples, what it means to lead a good marriage and to respect children, to respect each other, and to be an accepted person within the village, is something that of course was also at one point verbalized. Or at least you realize that, oh well, my mom and my dad hardly ever have a quarrel. And if so, they very quickly end it, and then they are happy with each other again. And this is something that you internalize and learn in this way.
Daily interactions.
Yeah, of course, you learn in daily interactions. But you also learn explicitly by verbalizing these things, and either in a kind of inner thinking, that's it, why? or by just asking people, and then you get an answer. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you very much. So I think this might be a follow-up question. So I was a little late because I had a meeting earlier, so I might have missed something. But it looks like this speech is very non-contextualized in some way. So, for example, if we give a speech to kids that age, we might tell a story or refer to some immediate experience they just had before. But in this case, it sounds pretty much just straight up lecturing. So I'm just curious, did you also observe them telling stories and relating to experiences, and also maybe, right, or when the experiences are happening, they would reinforce that idea again, things like that, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, good question. Again, I have, in the third chapter of our book, Growing Up on the Tropical Islands, I've presented three stories and this a speech that I collected on the Tropical Islands, and the stories tell about the good girl and the bad girl, for example, or the good gardener and the bad gardener. And the good girl, of course, got a nice husband and she was accepted in the village, but the bad girl didn't want to work. She was hanging around only with boys, but forgot to make brass curls. Then she also didn't know how to cook properly, and she didn't look for firewood. But the good girl did all this, and they said, well, she listened to her mum, and she is a good lady, and she has become a marvelous Tropical Islander woman. But this one, you can forget about her. And then that is the public shame, and that is something that Tropical Islanders try to avoid, if possible. The other one with a good gardener as well. Actually, I think. But one of the stories I have on as a good gardener is a kind of semi-true story, and I think even I know who is meant. But there was one excellent gardener in the village who overcame all the others. He was responsible. He was respected. He was loved by everybody. When people came from other villages, he had the word. He talked with them. He was friendly, and the other guy was only lying on the veranda, didn't garden, and even his wife and his daughter didn't have enough to eat. And then he went to the garden of that rich man and stole the yams, but this was planted unintentionally, because this yams is a yams that burns your mouth. And because he was such a bad gardener, he didn't know that. So he burned his mouth and the mouth of his mother, of his wife and his daughter. And then they said, we will only cook for ourselves, you won't get anything anymore. And then he decided, now I'll become a good gardener. And lo and behold, after 2 years, he was better than the other gardener and also could manage to have one of these big liquids. So you have these stories, and these stories also are, of course, some ideological, transfer ideological ideas of what it means to be a good man or a good woman on the Tropical Islands. And it's really nice that I also have that for the girls. But if you have any other questions with respect to other lectures or the whole series of lectures I presented, please feel free to ask them. That is the last chance you have. I won't give another lecture then.
So maybe
Yeah?
just another one. So you just briefly mentioned the shame. Public shame is the thing that they really want to avoid. So would you say that's probably the strongest negative emotion that they feel, that might be stronger than guilt or other kinds of right, and how that relates to their culture?
Yeah, public shame is the worst thing you can do. There were, in Malinowski's days, there were some incidents that he observed and reported. I'm sure that these things still happen, but they are no longer talked about and do not get public. Malinowski reports on the fact that one of the women in the village, and she was a chief's woman, the paramount chief and other very big chiefs can have more than one woman. And this is only because the brothers of the women have to also work for the husband of their sister. And that is how a Trojan chief can really manage to be a chief and to organize things, because he has first of all to convince people verbally that he wants them to make the paths broader, for example. But then when they do that, then he has to pay them with yams and food, basically. And so this woman, who was one of the wives of the chief, had a love affair with a young man. And it came to the public, and people were speaking about it openly. And her reaction was she climbed up a palm tree and committed suicide. And this suicide has a name, a specific name. So this is something that has been ritualized and is part of the culture of the Trojan Islanders. If you're breaking a marriage, if you are an adulterer or an adulteress, and it comes out, you have to do something. And one of the things you may do is to commit suicide. You can also leave the village. The man, the adulterer, left the Trojan Islands and ended up somewhere else in Papua New Guinea. Not even in the province, because it was even known in the province. But that is something that Malinowski reports. And so you see this, the rules and regulations and the norms that are valid on the Trojan Islands are really strongly supported by action. And if you break them, you have to face the consequences. Yeah, right.
Any grammaticalized forms of language use of Kanavila?
What do you mean?
Grammaticalized forms, that is, language users have to follow a particular pattern of speaking. And that pattern of speaking expresses very clearly the cultural specificity or subjectivity of the language or a particular language.
I don't get what you mean. I think you may mean scripts that may be used in certain situations to interact properly. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Grammaticalization usually is something completely different. Grammaticalization really has to do something with grammatical phenomena that for example, you have a repeater that grammaticalizes into a classifier. So you have no longer the repeater to refer to a whole. A whole is puanina, and ma puanina, na puanina is a repeater construction, this whole, this whole. And if you have a grammaticalization, then you shorten that and you come up with ma punina, puanina, where you just make the thing shorter. That is what usually is understood as grammaticalization. What I think what you mean is scripts and cultural frames that are necessary to be followed in certain situations. For example, you have these scripts if you want to address, if you want to make a speech. And I had to learn that because every time after I came back to the Trojan Islands after 1982 and 83, they expected a speech, a welcoming speech from me. And you have to know how you start that speech. And this is really a ritualized, it's not grammaticalized, it's a ritualized form. And this, you have to say, Kweguyao Missionari Tomotatawima. That is chiefs, missionaries. In former times it was Tomiga Megwa, magicians, but the missionaries have replaced the magicians, so you have missionari in the second word, and then Tomotatawima, people from Tawima. Senam Wazawa Haita. And I'm so happy that I'm back again, and then I come and tell them all the things that were responsible for my last years and for my coming back to Tawima. That was, for example, something they expected to me. So you have this kind of frame. You have different frames, for example, when you initiate a meeting in the village where you first present, really like we do, where you first present a kind of agenda and then you say, now the floor is open. That follows certain scripts and regulated forms of behavior.
Yeah, ritualized frames. Yeah, what I had in mind is, I mean, the scope is a bit narrower than
well, if you call this grammaticalization, I wouldn't do that, but anyhow, I think I know what you mean. You can, for example, play with your intonation and say something about the white man. If you really appreciate something or some knowledge, or if you are astonished, you can say, oh, dim dim. Just like that. Ah, dim dim. That's incredible. That's so good. That's so nice. But you can also say, dim dim. And that means, oh, shut up. You have no idea about that. Is that what you mean?
Not really, but we can talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a follow-up question, from Professor Shitakui. I wonder if there are some formulae expressions that reflects culture. For example, Lera Borowski had mentioned that in some Aboriginal tribes, the way they greet each other is just by saying where are you heading off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I wonder, is there any kind of like expressions that reflects what they their ideology or what they think?
That is exactly the same on the programs, and I first didn't understand that. It was one of my mistakes I made. You are greeted with the question of Ambea. That is, where are you going to? Ambe, where are you going to? And well, I thought it was obvious that every morning, and I was asked that question every morning after I got up and had brushed my teeth, I had my towel on my shoulder and had my bag with all the things that we slightly decadent Westerners think are absolutely necessary to take a bath, and was on my way to the freshwater grotto in the bush. And people asked me, whoever I met said, Gunter, I'm there. And I said, what? Bouquet. I was happy that I could already utter this two-word sentence. I will go to the Bouquet. Bouquet is the name of the freshwater grotto. And well, after 3 weeks or so, they were always every morning asking me that, to me, terribly silly question. It was obvious, wasn't it? And then my very good friend, the weather magician Voyer, and my neighbor came to me and said, Gunter, people do not like the way you respond. You have to really say what you are doing. And that was the first time when I was confronted with theory verb constructions. So after another while, I told them, Bala Bahaya Bahaita Basisu Papaisiva Bagini Ixina. That was one stereo verb constructions out of 6 verbs. Bala, I will go. Bahaya, I will bath. I will come back. Bahaita, I will stay. Basisu, Bagini, I will write my dictionary. 5, sorry. I will write with respect to my dictionary. And then they were happy about that. And then I realized, of course, I was an absolutely conceited fool. This was, they asked me that question, and they told me you always have to answer in biga mokita, not in the biga sopa. You shouldn't lie. This question doesn't accept a lie, and you shouldn't lie because it's in your own interest. When you walk these very narrow paths on the Tropic Islands, you can't even roll a bicycle on Kailuna, ride a bicycle in Kailuna. Then these paths are sharp coral. There are some holes. You can break your leg. You can cut your food. You can do all kinds of things if you pass coconut plantations. The coconuts can fall down on your head. So if you tell them what you are doing, if you do not show up, they come and look for you. And contrary to my stupid interpretation, it should be obvious what I'm doing, this was an offer to integrate me into the society. Because they told me, look, now you belong to us and we feel responsible for you. And I should have been extremely happy that they treated me in such a way. Comes that close to what you meant?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, sorry?
Yes, no, huge.
Yeah, they are huge. And of course, this is showing
They are
off.
this size.
Yeah, some of them, but they have come to a very specific festival, and of course they selected the best youngs.
Okay, the best one.
Yeah. But it's a society that terribly shows off. They really want to show that what kind of good gardeners they are, and this was a group from people from Simsim. They come from outlying islands that still belong to the Tropian Islands, and they came back to celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the first missionary who set foot on Kailiuna Island. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how fixed or how fluid these clans are. I mean, for example, because especially if people move to other urban areas, because you talk something about mafia-like structures, how does this work?
Yeah, well, first of all, they are terribly fixed. If you are versed with a belief system, what happens to you when you die? Once you were born in a clan, you will always be reborn in the same clan if you decide to get reborn. Paloma can decide, the spirit of the dead can decide to be reborn, but then, strangely enough, the Paloma will always find a woman of his same clan, and then she will bear the Paloma as a child later. What is not so strict is the fact that when you are in a different surrounding, a different environment, like for example in Port Moresby, and you have made it, for example, as I know a sales manager of Toyota in Port Moresby, and this guy is a Lukuba, and he has the lowest land of the Tropian Islands. But in his garden, he has a big chiefly yams house, which is decorated as a chiefly yams house. It's painted red, white, and black, and he also has white cowrie shells that ornament the whole house. If he would have this house on the Tropian Islands, every Malasi person who is the highest one would come immediately and would burn it down without any comment. It would be burnt down. And his guests in Port Moresby that are Malasi admire his nice Amazons, because they see this is a different way of making a career. He is influential, and now we can't transform our behavior that we would show on the islands where we are the masters to him, because here he has so much influence, he could give me a job. And so I have to accept his career and then his way of showing off that he has made it in Port Moresby. But again, once he would be back in the islands and he would dare to even have a small board that marks a chief, a tataba, on his house, the house would be burned down immediately.
And what happened to foreigners? And for example, to you, would you be integrated in a clan, or you're just the eternal outsider?
Well, to be honest, I think I would be the eternal outsider. But in the beginning, of course, they had to refer to me somehow. And what did they do? They made me a Lukasisiga. They looked into my hand. That is the way of how they decide your clan. And then they said, oh yeah, Gunter Yokwa Lukasisiga. And that is the clan of the missionaries. That's the clan where the climbers, the social climbers, come from. That was in 1982-83. When I came back in 1989, I had my grammar, my dictionary with me, and I donated that to the chief. 2 days later, a kind of group of old people, old men, influential old men, came to me and said, Gunter, we have to have another look at your hand. And then they came up with a beautifully staged discussion. Look, of course, it's not going to the left here, it's going to the right, it's just a slight turn, but it's obvious. No, we made a mistake. Gunter, I'm so sorry, we made a mistake. You are a Malasi, of course. That is what you can think of how they accept a foreigner into their clan system. That was fake. And I'm sure there were people who tried to, well, more or less go native. There was one guy, horrible person by the way, who was the owner of a guest house there, and he wanted to get integrated into the Kula exchange. I remember the Kula a few times. That is where you have these necklaces and the arm rings, and where you have to exchange them, and where you create a kind of safety net in the Pacific, because the valuables have to change and change and change the processes all the time, and this creates a kind of net of people that feel responsible for each other. And he invested a whole lot of money in that, and finally he got bankrupt. He had to leave the other island, and then the Tropians were laughing their head off because they tricked him. And they gave him the impression he would know the tricks of the Kula. And of course he didn't, and the tricksters won. It's a society, I think, which accepts you to an incredibly high level. I always was wondering why they gave us all that kind of information, not only me but also my wife. Probably because we were really learning Kilimila, and we could really speak with them. Most of the other guys haven't done that. But nevertheless, I'm sure I would never ever be accepted as a fully fledged Tropian island. And actually, I think I wouldn't like to be that. Yeah.
How open are they for knowledge? For instance, how open are they for knowledge? Like with the rain magic, for instance. Yeah. Did you tell them that we don't really believe in that, and do they accept that, or?
Yeah, they laugh about that when I said we don't believe in it, and they said, but look, it's working, and it's not raining. But they are absolutely eager to know things. For example, one of the first things they asked me when I had acquired the language in such a way that I could have basic conversations, they asked me, and how long does it take you to come from Germany to the Tropians? And I said, well, a day, a night, and then I'm here. How strange. And then I said, well, I will explain to you how it works. And when I went back, that was in 1982, went back, and I think, nerved my parents terribly, because I said, I need to have one of these water balls, you know, that you can blow up, and that's a ball, and on the outside of the ball there is the world. It's a kind of world planet imitation. I got one, thanks God. And then I came back to the Tropians and said, now I explain why it takes so long and what we have to do. And then I used my Coleman lamp, that is one of these kerosene lamps, which makes a relatively bright light, put it in the middle of my house, and asked, I have to walk around that, make some space for me, otherwise I trample on your knees. And then I had it around and showed them why there is a day and night, and why you have these long times going around the earth. And they really admired that way, and they understood it. Well, they also, that was a really tricky thing. In the late 1990s, the Seventh-day Adventists came to the Tropians, and they of course believed that in 2000 the world would perish. And they told all the Tropian islanders, and now you have your last year to live, and make sure that you come over to us, only our God will help you to survive. And they asked me, Gunter, is that true? And I said, no, and I told them about the fact that we have here the sun, and the sun is burning. And one day, like each and every fire, the sun will also burn out. After that burn-out syndrome, we all will perish. But this will last for so many years that none of us would ever experience it. And that really gave them a good feeling again. So they really want to know things, and therefore I think I absolutely believe in the fact as soon as a language community feels the need to know something, for example, if they feel the need to know something about physics, they will work on it and they will develop their language in such a way that they could talk about it. It's just the need a speech community feels that motivates language change and innovation in language as well. I'm convinced about that. Okay, anything else?
No, if no further